Good morning and welcome back to the podcast, Digitally Transformed. I'm your host, Melissa, and today we have Mike Miller with us. He is a senior engineer here at Infused Innovations. He specializes in security and modern work, and we know that security is a hot topic these days with organizations transitioning into virtual and hybrid work. So today we're going to discuss Windows 10 security with Microsoft Endpoint Manager, which has been an incredible tool for so many of our clients as well as our own team. How are you doing today, Mike?
Yeah, I'm doing great. Today has been a great day. It's been very busy. I feel like you and I have had a lot of meetings, so looking forward to the podcast and going over this topic.
We have, and you're an early riser. You told me you're an early. You said you get up at 4, right?
Yeah, I got to start the day early, right? I don't stay up late, so that's my time for personal growth and things like that, learning about the new trends, all that fun stuff.
I love that. You're a hard worker. I mean, 4 a.m., I need my sleep. So I'll be in bed. So let's dig in because security is such a hot topic these days. You know it all too well. And so many businesses are just trying to figure out the best way to keep their information safe, their data safe. And quite frankly, there's just a lot on the line with the amount of breaches that we've been seeing. And so many businesses are really just looking for workable solutions. Let's start this conversation by talking a little bit about different vulnerabilities that exist in the workplace, whether it's internal or external.
Yeah, it seems like every week we're reading about the newest malware that somebody created or the newest phishing email chain, the latest user that was overprivileged and was able to be abused by an external attacker. Unpatched software. Every single day we're reading about these articles that come out about these things. And it can be internal, it can be external. Phishing emails, typically you'll see those come externally. Maybe a user's compromised, so they send an internal email, but typically that's external. Unpatched software, maybe that's your software that you're running inside of your company, or it's third party, like you're using Microsoft Word or Adobe Reader, whatever the case may be. Those third party applications are a big vulnerability there. So all of those things, you read about them all the time, and we have a lot of great products here that we can help businesses secure those.
Right, and I don't think that we defined what insider risk is for those who don't know. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so think of insider risk as it could be an intentional case where a user is intentionally giving data to someone outside of the company that they shouldn't be, whether it's source code or sensitive data regarding employees, whatever the case may be. It could be intentional or it could be unintentional. They could just accidentally share a file with the wrong person or allow access to their computer when they didn't mean to, or give someone their password by accident. So it could be intentional or unintentional, but that insider risk is from your employees within your company.
Yeah, I mean, I could see how that would easily happen, if you're sending a message to someone and you accidentally send the wrong document, or let's say you're copying and pasting something and you paste it into the wrong message for the wrong person on the team.
Absolutely.
We talked a little bit about internal risk and a little bit about external risk. But tell us truly, what is the number one way that organizations are getting breached right now? And why? Is it something that they're not doing? Is it something that they are doing that's maybe making them more susceptible to a cyber attack?
Yeah, so I'll start by saying that maybe narrowing down the number one reason is a little bit more complicated because that could change tomorrow. Like today, the number one cause could be human error, but tomorrow there could be a unpatched security vulnerability, and that will become the number one cause. So for me, it's a couple of things. One, you're always going to have human error at the top of this list. And again, whether it's intentional or unintentional, humans will always be your number one weakness. There's phishing emails that they're going to fall for. There's always the chance that they could share data outbound to somebody that they shouldn't be. You're never truly going to eliminate that threat, but you can always keep training your end users and hoping that they catch on to the proper ways of managing company data. There's, like I mentioned, unpatched software that lead to security vulnerabilities, whether it's an attacker finding a new way to exploit that vulnerability, or you not keeping your software up to date, or your security team not keeping it up to date, leaving that door open for attackers. Of course, there's always going to be malware being bounced around. Somebody's always going to create a new type of malware or modify malware so that it goes unrecognized. That risk is always there. There are a lot of ways to help mitigate that risk. it's hard to narrow down the number one way to do it, especially whenever the category changes day by day. But there are solutions out there like Microsoft Endpoint Manager where you can try to negate these risks as much as possible from all of your devices, whether it's your Windows computer, your Android or iPhones, whatever the case may be. Microsoft Endpoint Manager does a great job of helping you with those risks.
Okay, and tell me if I'm wrong. It sounds like you would agree that it would be really important for organizations to invest time and money and resources into training as well for security.
Yeah, absolutely. Keeping your users up to date on the newest trends of risk that somebody's going to try to use to get them to fall for something is massively important. Today, phishing emails, they're getting very hard to detect from the human eye, very hard to see that it's a fake email. And I think keeping your users up to date on trends like that is massively important.
Oh, for sure. I mean, gosh, I feel like we could do a whole podcast on just phishing emails. You know, some of them, like you said, are so realistic, and then some of them are so out of this world, so obvious. You know, I'm sure that everyone has seen these, where you get the email about how your long lost cousin left something for you in the bank and you need to give all of your credit card information and social security information to collect it at the hopes of being a billionaire. But again, to your point, I do think that there are a lot of emails these days that are actually they're easily disguised as, oh wow, I'm getting an email from the HR department from my company and they want me to do this thing and I have to do it. I know for me, gosh, a handful of years ago, I was a teacher. I was working at a college and I got this email and it was actually from a very similar email that the dean of the college, his email was, and it had said like, hey, I need you to send gift cards to all of the staff. And I just remember feeling like, this is not something that he would normally ask me to do. Like this is a very weird email. And I just immediately texted him. I had his number and I'm like, hey, did you email this to me? And he's like, absolutely not. No. But, for a moment, I felt like they kind of had me. But again, I think it's important to have, an understanding of certain things to be aware of when you're looking at emails for sure. Do you have, just off the top of your head, do you have a couple tips or tricks on kind of identifying scammy emails?
Yeah, the first thing I would say is trust your gut. So like you mentioned, you had a feeling that that's not something he would ever ask of you. Trust that feeling whenever you're reading those emails. And if it's someone you don't know, I would just delete the email. And if it really is important, they'll reach back out. If it's someone you do know, contact them via the phone. Never respond to the email directly or click on anything if you have any questions. But something to keep in mind is, always check the actual email address, not just the name. So if it's coming from Bob Jones, you want to make sure that it's Bob Jones's email, not just his name with some random Gmail or AOL account sending it.
Yeah, and I don't think that people understand how easy it is to get your information, right? It's literally one click. And
Exactly.
That's the thing is if you, like you said, if you have that gut feeling and you're like, I'm just going to click on this link and just see kind of where it takes me. And I'm just, there's no harm here. I'm just going to investigate a little bit, like, boom, done. Computer compromise. So just to reiterate how important that is. So we were talking about Microsoft Endpoint Manager. So can you tell us about what that is in detail? Talk to us about, what this program is, what the benefits of this technology is, how it works. Maybe give us some real life examples in the modern workplace of how an organization can use this technology.
Yeah, absolutely. So Microsoft Endpoint Manager, it's a unified management platform for all of your devices. You can be managing on-premise managed devices, hybrid devices, Android phones, iPhones, Windows 10 devices. All of these devices can be managed now in what we like to call a single pane of glass for your device management. So Microsoft Endpoint Manager really helps with the simplification of this device management. And I think one of the biggest things that we see here at Infuse Innovations when a potential client comes up to us, their biggest issue is complexity. They have software A for identity or software B for devices. With Microsoft Endpoint Manager, and you get that unified pane of glass, that's a massive step in the right direction in terms of simplifying your environment and making your IT overhead that much easier.
So maybe also tell us, why is it so important that you have a holistic solution as opposed to maybe 10 solutions? I mean, what's the difference there, and how can you increase your security by having one solution versus 10 different platforms and programs that are all running at the same time but not integrated together?
Yeah, so the big problem that you just pointed out was the integration. When you have that holistic point of view, let's say you get an alert on someone's device with the holistic point of view that, for instance, Microsoft brings to the table with the Microsoft XDR suite, you now have access to investigate that alert in its entirety from one platform. You can investigate the identity risk, the device risk, the email that maybe came through that caused it, or the file that was downloaded. You can access all of those reports through your Microsoft suite. If you're running all these different pieces of software, one for identity, one for data, whatever the case may be, you have to bounce around every single one of these because they're not integrating. You can't see how this alert is tied to identity and device by looking at one of those. You have to continually bounce around. And if this is an active compromise, you're now that much slower in resolving this attack on your company.
Yeah, and that's important, really, because seconds to minutes, I mean, it's all so important with how much information they're able to get.
Absolutely.
Back to this idea of Microsoft Endpoint Manager and the functions of it. Can you go a little bit more in depth and tell us a little bit more about some of the other functions that it has that organizations could really utilize?
Yeah, so one, I'll start by saying Microsoft Endpoint Manager is quite large in terms of your capabilities. One thing that you can do is you can use compliance policies, which would block access to a device if it's not at a trusted state. You could start using mobile application management to enforce protection at the application layer. You can force encryption on those devices. You can control how your data is used. Let's say you only want work content to be accessed through Outlook, Word, Teams, and the rest of the Microsoft suite, and then maybe Adobe, or you only trust Microsoft Edge. Using these mobile application management policies or application protection policies, you now have protection and capabilities to do that. You can say you're not going to open this work link in Google Chrome, or you're not going to use the G Suite to access a data encrypted Word document. So that's for me, that is a huge step in the right direction, giving you full control over what applications are being used to access your company content. And then you can also use pre-built security baselines. So Microsoft has built these security baselines for Windows 10, Microsoft Defender, and Microsoft Edge that you can use to roll out to your company that cover so many different areas. There's BitLocker encryption, attack surface reduction rules, firewall rules. They're all built into this one policy that you can deploy, and that reduces your overhead tenfold. Instead of having 5 policies for 5 different things, they're probably in that baseline, and you've tripled your device security overnight with these policies.
Can you give us a real life example of how the compliance policies work?
Yeah, so recently I actually just had a client. They wanted to block access to all company content if the device wasn't actively encrypted with BitLocker. So with the compliance policy, I was able to say that if BitLocker is not running and is not actively encrypting the device will be marked as non-compliant, and all company content will be blocked on that. So you can't open emails, you can't open your Word documents, nothing company-wise will be open. You can still use like Google Chrome if you want to browse the web or whatever, but company content is inaccessible until
And how fast does that just disappear for them?
So it's as real time as it is from the device syncing with Microsoft Endpoint Manager. So as long as you have an active network connection and that sync is there, Endpoint Manager is going to say you are blocked because you're non-compliant. And you can actually tell the policy to say, wait 24 hours, give them a chance to enforce this before we block them. For this specific client, there was an immediate want of blocking. So it was an immediate block. As soon as it was marked non-compliant, they were blocked. As soon as the device communicated with Intune, again, or Microsoft Endpoint Manager, which also gets referred to as Intune. So if I say Intune, that's why.
I feel like that's something that could be incredibly helpful for businesses. If, let's say, you have an employee that's doing something that really is compromising the sanctity or the information in the organization, and you really need to block them. I mean, that's an incredible technology that could do that quickly, it sounds like. Tell me what someone who is new to this technology, Microsoft Endpoint Manager, what they could do to just sort of start to increase their device security?
I would start off by saying, always remember that security is not a sprint. Your security work is never done. However, with Microsoft Endpoint Manager, like I mentioned earlier, you have access to those security baseline settings. And these settings, they are incredibly massive. They cover user rights on the machine, firewall settings, attack surface reduction rules, which really help with the lateral movement attacks on your device. They help with ensuring that your devices are actively getting a security intelligence update. So for reference, security intelligence updates are checking to make sure that the signature of files are active at all times. So if a file has a malicious signature on it, those security intelligence updates help you stay up to date on those and block those files. So I would definitely start by saying, if you wanted to really increase your device security from the start, looking at those security baselines and going from there, fine tuning them to what your company needs and getting those rolled out.
Right on. And tell us a little bit about how Endpoint Manager can help with managing Windows updates, and also maybe explain why updates are so important for security in the first place.
Yeah, so I'll start with the second part of your question there. Updates are a vital part of security. There are security researchers out there constantly trying to find vulnerabilities within software, whether it's a software company that built it using their security researchers, or people paying security researchers to say, hey, help us find these vulnerabilities. Once those are found, they're going to release updates for them because they don't want to get exploited. They want those updates released and people to patch their software as soon as possible. So keeping your systems and your applications up to date is vitally important. Updates are released for a reason, and typically those reasons are security related. Regarding how Endpoint Manager can help with those updates, you can use Microsoft Endpoint Manager to deploy quality and feature updates. So using update ring policies in Microsoft Endpoint Manager, you can fine tune to say, which service channel you want to use, whether it's semi-annual targeted. Maybe you want your IT department to be on Windows Insider because they're staying ahead of the rest of the company, so they get to test new versions. You can use these update rings to enforce updates on like the Microsoft products you're using, such as Teams and Outlook, or the ability to block driver updates on the machine, which can be really important because a lot of times driver updates can contain vulnerabilities. So you want to be really careful about which drivers you're updating and which ones you aren't. You can also set special deferral times with quality and feature updates. So if you don't want your C-suite to get the updates the day they're released because you want to have time to test them, you can have an update ring set for them so that they get it a week later, 2 weeks later, whatever the case may be, whatever you're comfortable with in your organization, you can set that window. And you also have the capability to roll back feature updates. So feature updates are those updates to Windows 1909, the actual version of Windows changing. Those are typically massive updates and can sometimes cause errors that are unexpected. So you want to have the ability to roll back those updates. And with Endpoint Manager, you can set the number of days that you want to be able to roll that back for. So it can be anywhere from 2 to 60 days. So you have 60 days to discover issues that these updates have caused for you.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love the flexibility and control that you have with a program like that, where you get to decide the timing, how it works, who it rolls out to, all of that.
Exactly.
Let's talk about Windows 10 0-day vulnerabilities. Tell us what this is and why it's so important for organizations to know about.
Yeah, this is one of my favorite questions because 0 days, I think it's extremely important for not only security teams to understand 0 days, but other people in the company as well, because when a 0 day is released and the security team goes to update them, you want to know what's happening here. So a 0 day vulnerability is something regarding maybe your Windows operating system or an application that you're using. It is an active vulnerability being discovered by an attacker and actively being exploited. So the vendors of these applications or the operating systems, they don't know about this vulnerability yet. This has been exploited by an attacker. And that's why it's called a 0 day, because it's the number of days that the software vendor has known about this vulnerability. With Microsoft Endpoint Manager, you can use a quality update ring. So let's say Microsoft had, for instance, the Print Nightmare 0 day that came up in July. As soon as Microsoft released the patch for that, you could go use the quality update ring to grab that patch. It's called an out of band patch because it doesn't happen on Patch Tuesday which is once a month. They use that out-of-band patch to secure that 0-day. So you can grab that and actively deploy that to them as soon as Microsoft put that in Microsoft Endpoint Manager, which they did very quickly back in July. Or let's say you have Google Chrome. If you're deploying Google Chrome through Microsoft Endpoint Manager, they have a 0-day. You can grab the new version of Google Chrome that Google has released to secure that 0-day and then deploy that to all of your devices. So now you're covered from the previously exploited vulnerability.
I kind of want to shift a little and talk about, we talked in a previous podcast about how there is so much hiring that's happening right now. And a lot of that really is stemming from the transition to remote work. And a lot of people who over the pandemic had lost work or decided to change their priorities and what they were looking for in the workplace. There's been a lot of that. So there's been a lot of hiring happening. So talk to us about how this technology, Microsoft Endpoint Manager, can help businesses when hiring remote employees.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I think this is something that'll really help businesses going forward should they decide to use it. With Microsoft Endpoint Manager, organizations can use what's called Windows Autopilot, which is really just a collection of different technologies within Microsoft Endpoint Manager that IT departments can use to pre-configure and set up Windows PCs. So in the past, every time somebody needed a new computer, the IT department would spend countless hours building the Windows image that was getting released on there, getting updates, installing applications with the user, setting policies, things like that. It would be a massive amount of time that they would spend doing that versus other things to help the business. So with Autopilot, you can now preset all of these settings so that when the device is signed into by the user using their credentials, all of these settings get installed. You don't have to create the custom image anymore because Autopilot sets it to basically a blank state of an image, and what you want deployed gets deployed.
So I'm just going to reiterate what you've said in, layman's terms. Basically, when you are onboarding an employee, you don't have to go through this incredibly difficult process of putting all these things together on the computer and setting all of these different settings and getting all these softwares and technologies, which, like you said, is a lot of time and energy and hassle and resources. You can just literally get someone plugged in this one sort of solution and they just sign in and boom, everything's there.
Yeah, so to your point a little bit about the remote workers, let's say you're buying a new Windows PC for someone that you've just hired. If you buy that PC from a manufacturer, let's say Dell can take what's known as the hardware hash, which is basically just the ID of a computer, and import that into your Microsoft Endpoint Manager environment. And then from there, the IT department just needs to make sure that the device, which will be named its serial number, gets placed in a group associated with an Autopilot profile. Once they've done that, the device is now ready for the user. The user receives it maybe at their home, or they go pick up the device from somewhere. Once they receive that device and put it on a network, they enter their work credentials that they've been given. Everything that's assigned to them or assigned to a group that they're in, maybe they're in the HR resources group, everything that's assigned to that group gets automated down in the machine. The applications, the security policies, the settings, maybe you want Windows to time out after a certain amount of time. You can preset all of that with policies using Microsoft Endpoint Manager or custom applications that you've deployed. As soon as their credentials are entered, those things start getting deployed to the machine.
Again, with all of the hiring, to be able to save the time, the energy, the resources, and be able to just plug people in, that's awesome. To end the podcast, I kind of wanted to ask you, just for fun, tell me your favorite maybe 2 or 3 features of the platform and tell me why.
So I think one of the things I'm the biggest fan of is the security baseline policies. Before I started using those, I would have 15 to 20 different policies to cover some of the things that are in those policies, like BitLocker encryption, firewall rules, attack surface rules. We had all these custom policies in place. And now with the security baselines, since they cover so many of those, everything's reduced to kind of that one point of management. So I think that's really one of my favorite things. And then I really enjoyed the device compliance policies. You get to say what you trust and what you don't in terms of device characteristics, whether it's the operating system version or whether or not BitLocker's on there, or maybe the device is at a high level of risk based on your antivirus that you're using, you can block that device from accessing company content until it reaches the state that you trust. And I think that's a massive point of protection for companies.
And a follow-up question to that, are you able to personalize it per device, per computer as well, as opposed to just the entire company, here's the one all be all settings?
Yeah, you can set as many of those policies that you want, and each one of them can be to a certain set of characteristics. So maybe you want your IT team to only be on the newest version of Windows. You can set a policy for them to make sure that their compliance policy is always running that version of Windows that you want. And maybe you want HR to be 3 versions behind them because that's a trusted version. You can set as many as you want, as many as your organization needs, so that you feel like your users are using the best case of technology.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, thank you, Mike, so much for talking to us about Microsoft Endpoint Manager, security, all of these different features of the program. I know this is something that so many businesses are really, they're looking for a solution for all of these things. And it's really cool that this is just kind of a holistic platform that businesses can use.